So what we're going to do here for the first test is use silver. We're going to mix it with water. In its pure form, it's pretty viscous, especially for dipping applications. So we're going to make a 1-to-1 solution, meaning 1 gallon of paint mixed with 1 gallon of water. Now you can see when we pour, we have a lot left in the pail, so we can use our water in here first to rinse the sides of the pail, so we're not wasting anything. And we're not discarding anything to the environment that we don't need to. Now, metallic pigments are somewhat dense, so the more water we add, the lower the viscosity and the more likely that the pigments over time will settle. So periodic stirring will be beneficial to keep the solution uniform. And then once we have the components in there, we can go ahead and stir. Nothing fancy. And you don't need to stir at a rapid rate. Stirring too quickly will generate way too much foam. And when the paint dries, it can leave unsightly marks where the air bubbles pop. This is seeded eucalyptus, and it's referred to as naked because all the leaves have been stripped off. But with the shape, the little pods, seed pods, give a nice floral design effect, and this takes paint pretty well. So literally, there's nothing super complicated. We're just going to immerse the foliage. We'll remove it and allow the excess to drip back into our solution, recovering as much as we can. And after this is done, it will hang and be allowed to dry. The next thing we're going to dip is a limonium variety. This is commonly sold under the name Caspia. It's a common low-cost filler, and again, it receives paint pretty well. One of the important things when you're doing this is to make sure you can find foliages that are easy to paint. Not all of them are, and we'll see that as we progress later on. And you can see some of the paint film there. That'll come away as we shake it. That'll disappear. This is a foliage known as camellia. This can be a little bit more of a challenge to paint because we have a surface wax on the leaf. It is very difficult to get paint to adhere to wax. It's best if we can remove the wax prior to painting. Now, how do you do that? Well, there are a couple of ways. Probably the easiest method is to pre-treat or pre-wash the foliage in a degreaser or a wax stripper. And so we have that here. It is called liquid sandpaper, but it helps prepare the surface to receive paint. is we're going to immerse this first. And you can see how it wets out the foliage. Without this, the water would beat up on the leaf, much like you see water on the waxed car surface. And the longer you leave it in, the more effective it will be. It comes down to kind of a balance between labor cost and productivity. We see we get a pretty good coating. We'll see a little difficulty getting the edges of the leaves to receive paint. There's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do about that. There's differences between the gold and the silver paint, and so we need to customize or fit the dilution to the paint. What we have found through our testing is that a dilution rate of 3:1, in other words 3 parts paint, 1 part water, works well for the gold to get full coverage. Now, if you want to do a real light accent, what some people might call a wash, you can dilute it down further. But again, remember that the more water you put in, you lower the viscosity of the paint solution, the greater the tendency that the pigment is going to want to settle out of solution. So periodic mixing is very beneficial. Known as ruscus. There are different varieties of ruscus. 2 predominant ones. This is known as Italian ruscus. There's also an Israeli ruscus that is similar in appearance. This also makes a nice painted filler for holiday arrangements. Now here's another example of a foliage where there's a sufficient amount of wax on the surface. So getting paint to adhere is a little bit more of a challenge for something like this, or the camellia we worked with, or a real common foliage that's painted, what is known as baby eucalyptus. But that's fairly uniform coverage. If you dilute it too much further, you're going to find that as the water increases, your coverage uniformity decreases. Most people refer to it in the floral trade as baby eucalyptus or baby yew. This is a bear. You can see there's not only wax, but there's a surface bloom on this. This is not an easy product to dye, or to paint rather, and so this does pose some difficulty. A pre-treatment does help, but even there, it's still a bit difficult. This is a good candidate. You can see as that starts to wash off, but it's not instantaneous. So if you can let it sit for a little bit of time, that will help. Now normally we would have a greater depth of solution here, but since this is really a sample demonstration, we're not filling the tote like we normally would. Another thing to remember is when you're not using this, you want to cover the top so you don't have a lot of water evaporation. And the other thing is you don't want to make up a lot more paint than you're going to use within a certain period of time. When a paint is made, one of the components is a preservative, you might call it a biocide, but that's sufficient for the paint itself. When you dilute it with water, you're diluting the biocide. And when we're running foliage through here, we're putting organic plant matter in there, which is a real food source for bacteria. And so if you let this sit for an extended period of time, several days, you're going to start seeing microbial formation, bacteria, mold, yeast. And kind of the rough idea is to just make it the amount of solution you're going to do in a given day. We don't always have to have solid coverage on everything. Sometimes an accent is nice. This is Hypericum. It is a foliage with the fruited berries on the top that are particularly nice at Christmas. Red and gold, maroon and gold make good combinations. So what we've done here is we've diluted the paint mixture down to 1:1. We don't want, for this particular case, solid coverage. We're going to give it a wash effect. You can see we still have some of the green from the leaves coming through. We have some of the red in the fruit up top. When it dries, it's a really nice effect.